$80. They know they could sell it at that point, and they have. They've sold gangbusters. They could probably charge $100 for it, and it would still sell. I guarantee it. And so retro games are not actually as expensive as you would think. Now, why is that? Well, in one of my videos I talked about digital games and why they're kind of a little bit more popular in Japan. PCs aren't so popular here yet. You'd think they would be because of the, digital games. But these digital games are sort of, not that they're popular here, but they're more enticing because of the limited space and whatnot. So these used game stores, there's tons of them. And you won't see as many in America. Why? Going back to my other point, it's such a big country. That's why we have these used game stores, but a lot of them will close down, or you'll see kind of really highly popular shops stick around. But you also see the game prices be very, very high. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, sure. I mean, people seem to think they're going to retire on these retro video games, which is insane because it's helping kill the hobby. Here in Japan, it's kind of, okay, on to the next sort of thing, right? So, okay, the Switch is out. All right, see you later, Wii U, on to the next one. Now, and of course, in the States, it's like that too. Don't get me wrong. People want to move on to the next one, but I think that is a little bit stronger here, which is why you'll see people trading in games quicker, or you'll see these used game shops, and they'll have tons of supply. There's a local shopping mall here in the city where I live, and there's about 6 game stores, and they all have ample supply. It's kind of crazy. You don't see these things in America. And not sure at first glance, it's like, wow, this is amazing. But then once you start to think about it, well, why? On the one hand, you have so many people trading in games. Even now, people are probably digging through their closets, finding a bunch of Super Famicom games and trading them in. The Super Famicom, the Famicom, those sold tons and tons and tons of games and copies here, so that's why there's so much of them. On the flip side, finding Sega Genesis or Mega Drive stuff is a little bit harder. Even Famicom Disk System is starting to go away because a lot of those discs are breaking over time. So there's niche stuff here, don't get me wrong. The Sega Saturn stuff, they produced a lot of it here, so you'll find those games without much problem, like Panzer Dragoon or whatever. PlayStation games, of course, PlayStation rules the roost here, so PS1, 2, 3, and 4, you'll find ample supply there. And this is what I think helps keep the retro game prices down for the most part, is just that there's so much of them. Think about it. Going to buy Super Mario All-Stars now in the States, it's going to run you, I believe, over $100. If you were to buy a boxed that's not reproduction, if you were going to just buy a boxed with the manual, you're spending over $100. It's crazy, maybe even $200 or something. Here you can get it complete for $20 because there's so much supply, there's so many people getting rid of it, and it doesn't have that same value that I think people are trying to go for in the States. Sure, it's not like people don't collect things here. No, it's very well known that there's people who like to collect video games and anime, manga, just collect things in general. But I think kind of in the West, that sort of video game collecting hobby is a much bigger thing, and I think that's what kind of drives the price up, along with the supply sort of being spread out a little bit more. Again, you have a country the size of California with millions of copies of Famicom games, and yeah, the prices aren't going to be that high. But there is a problem actually, and that is foreigners buying games in Japan and then reselling them overseas. And I say foreigners because it's not just the Westerners doing this. There are people in Hong Kong and China who buy these games too. They come here, they spend tons of money. There's actually signs at some stores. If you go to Tokyo or Osaka or wherever there's major game stores, look for a place called Surugaya. And this is a used kind of figures, games, and anime shop. They have their own game stores too. They'll have things where if you buy more than 30 games, they'll give you serious discounts. I don't know about you, I don't know many people I don't know how many people go to these stores and buy 30 plus games unless you're traveling. But even if you're traveling, that's kind of a lot. 30 games, it's kind of crazy. There's a lot of these people from Asia who are buying these games up in, again, the dozens, and they're reselling them over there, or they're selling them online or something like that. And so the other thing from the Western perspective is, I mentioned our games are usually much more expensive on the used market. Again, going back to the Mario All-Star example, well, Mario All-Stars, you could play it in Japanese, right? It's easy to mod your Super Nintendo. You can just take the tabs out. I think in Europe it's harder, but in America it's easy to do it. You can play Super Famicom games no problem. And so you're playing a game where you don't really need to rely on the text. I mean, yeah, sure, save and continue or whatever's in Japanese, but you can navigate around that no problem. So now these people are buying games from Japan and taking that supply out of Japan, which is, I think it is starting to increase the price just a little bit. When I came here 4 4 years ago, I was finding Nintendo 64 games, Super Famicom games really cheap, and I just assumed that nobody wanted them. It was great. I found a Paper Mario for $10, which is beyond crazy. Now, over the course of 4 years, the price has gone up to $30, about 3,000 yen sometimes. The original Animal Crossing for N64 used to be a little bit cheaper. Granted, it's one of the last games on the system, so those prices tend to usually go higher anyway. But now, for a box copy, it's over $40, which it was not like that a couple years ago. So clearly things are changing here. Another thing that I think is increasing the prices of these games is the constant exposure to certain stores here, like Super Potato. Now, I don't want to rag on this store, but I will say this, it is fantastic to go and visit, especially the one in Tokyo, because it is like the kind of, I mean, they say it's the mecca of games. They have one in Osaka too, they have a few in Osaka, and they're great because they have so much kind of rare stuff that you never usually see out in the wild. The thing is though, the prices are insane. They're exorbitant. They're huge. I've seen prices of games go for maybe 2 to 3 times what they should go for. Again, I think it's because that store, that brand has become so popular overseas on the internet. You see it in YouTube videos. They know they can sell to people. And I mean, just think about it. You go to Japan, this country that is hard to navigate, right? I mean, you can get around in English, but if you don't really know Japanese, it's tough. It's not easy. You've heard of Super Potato. It's awesome. It's great. It's got all the games you ever need. You maybe don't want to go anywhere else, because if you kind of factor in budget and traveling, it's probably cheaper sometimes to just buy a game there if you're only going to be around Tokyo or something like that. There are other stores, of course, but that is kind of the easiest one to find, right? But unfortunately, I think this kind of mix of things is sort of contributing to the games increasing. They know what is popular in the West. They're not stupid, of course. So Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, for example, Mother 2, these games were not that expensive a couple years ago, but now they know, okay, well, Earthbound goes for $300, $400, $500 boxed if you're lucky, if you could even find one that's legitimate. So, Mother 2, even though it's in Japanese completely, maybe somebody, who knows, they have a translation tool, or you can use one of those kind of patchers, whatever. It's nice to just have the physical item anyway, whatever. I don't know your reasoning, but the price is starting to go up. Thankfully, I snagged a copy of mine for about 1,000 yen, but I've seen them now go for 2, 3, sometimes 4,000 yen. Just kind of crazy. Those RPGs usually tend to stay cheaper because it's just so text heavy. Things like Chrono Trigger and something like Final Fantasy is nice because you'll find those really cheap here, seeing as Final Fantasy is not as popular as Dragon Quest, which goes for much more usually. I was surprised about that at first. I bought Final Fantasy VI in Tokyo for 500 yen. I couldn't believe it. Of course, the price is starting to raise up because people know Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy III, overseas, very hard to find, very expensive. There you go. These titles, I get the practice behind it. Sure, if I was in the States, I wanted to play this game legally, I would go and buy the Japanese version. This is good with Saturn games too. When I was in the States, I bought House of the Dead. It's practically the same as I think it's the same as the English version. Some of these games will be in English actually, but it's just the Japanese region on the disc or the cartridge or whatever. So I get the point of it, but I think these are kind of the factors that are contributing to the rise of prices in games here. They're still way cheaper than America and Europe, but for how long? I don't know. So anyway, this was kind of my off-the-cuff thing about new game prices and used game prices in Japan. I know it's not very polished, but I kind of just wanted to record something quick and see how I could do. What do you think? I hope I did a good job. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I'm sorry about that if I did. But thanks again for watching as always, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.